Some say it was murder. Others whisper about cults, spirits, and possession. But the Jameson family didn't just vanish. They left behind a puzzle with no edges, no center, and no certainty. On a chilly afternoon in October 2009, Bobby and Sherilyn Jameson, along with their 6-year-old daughter Madison, packed up their white pickup truck and drove deep into the wooded hills of southeastern Oklahoma. They said they were scouting land to buy. But what they left behind, inside their truck, told a different story. There was no sign of struggle, no tire tracks leading away. The truck sat abandoned on a remote dirt road, untouched, almost like it had been placed there deliberately. Inside, their coats, cell phones, IDs, wallets, and $32,000 in cash. The doors were locked. The keys were gone. And the family? Erased. In the days that followed, search teams scoured the area. Helicopters swept overhead. Dogs combed the forest. Volunteers walked mile after mile in silence. But nothing turned up. No footprints, no clothing, not even a trail. Just the quiet wind through trees and that eerily pristine truck, like a monument to something unfinished. But what truly unnerved investigators was the footage discovered back at the Jamesons' home, security camera video from the day they left. In it, Bobby and Sherilyn moved back and forth between the house and truck, dozens of times. Their movements were strange, silent, robotic. No talking, no smiling, no rush. It was as if they were in a trance, and little Madison followed quietly, clutching her favorite doll. Whatever was happening that day, it had already begun before they left their driveway. The Jamesons were not your typical family. Neighbors described them as distant, sometimes erratic, but never dangerous. Bobby had suffered a back injury years prior, leaving him in chronic pain and out of steady work. Sherilyn struggled with depression and was reportedly prescribed medication for bipolar disorder. Their home was cluttered, walls scrawled with cryptic writings and spiritual phrases, some in her handwriting, others in Bobby's. They'd once told friends they believed their house was haunted. Bobby even claimed to have seen spirits moving through the hallways, and Sherilyn had written in a journal about fighting off dark presences. One entry read, "They come to me in my sleep. I wake up breathless." It might have sounded like spiritual paranoia, or it might have been the first crack in something deeper, something darker. A few months before they vanished, Bobby went to a local pastor with an unusual request. He asked if there was a way to buy special bullets to shoot spirits. The pastor, confused, dismissed it as a joke. But Bobby didn't laugh. He claimed a group of shadowy figures had been following them, watching them from the trees. Sherilyn, for her part, had recently written a letter addressed to Bobby, never mailed, never spoken aloud. It was filled with rage, bitterness, and confusion. In it, she accused him of being absent, disconnected from their lives, and spoke of leaving him. But when the letter was found, tucked in a drawer, they were still together, still planning to move, still looking for land, out in the middle of nowhere. Their truck was found a week after they disappeared. It sat motionless under the canopy of trees in Latimer County, far off the main road. The engine was off, but the gas tank was still half full. There was no sign of forced entry, no damage, no blood. The family's belongings were all there. Wallets, phones, GPS, even Madison's school books. And then there was the cash, $32,000 stuffed in a bank envelope under the driver's seat. No one could explain it. The Jamesons weren't wealthy. They didn't trust banks. That much was known. But why bring that much money, without telling anyone, to a land deal that had no official paperwork? It wasn't a spontaneous trip. Whatever they were doing, it had been planned, but not explained. As news spread, theories multiplied. Some believed they'd gotten lost in the wilderness, maybe fell into a ravine, or got caught in the cold. But the weather had been mild, and Bobby's GPS showed they'd walked just a short distance from the road. Others believed it was a drug deal gone wrong. Yet no drugs were found. No weapons either. Just that cash. Untouched. Then came the wilder explanations. A family friend mentioned Bobby had recently talked about reading the Satanic Bible for research. Others said Sherilyn had a brief interest in witchcraft. A photo surfaced of her wearing a witch hat, grinning with Madison. Some saw it as harmless. Others saw warning signs. But no one could explain how 3 people disappeared without a trace, leaving only questions behind. Investigators returned to the Jamesons' home hoping to find something, anything, that might explain their disappearance. What they found only deepened the mystery. Inside, the family dog was still there, underfed, but alive. Mail had piled up. The TV was off. Everything felt paused, like the house had been left in a hurry, but not in chaos. In the bedroom, they found Sherilyn's journal filled with odd passages about astral projection, cleansing rituals, and voices in the walls. Bobby's laptop contained a folder of saved maps, many centered around remote parts of the mountain. Strangest of all, they'd written the word witch repeatedly on one of the doors. No context, no explanation. Even the family photo albums had been rearranged, as if they were preparing for something, or trying to erase what came before. So what really happened in those woods? A family of 3 doesn't simply vanish on a clear day, leaving behind their truck, their money, and their lives. Was it a planned escape? A staged disappearance? Or were they victims of something they never saw coming? The deeper you dig, the darker it gets. Because as authorities struggled with the silence, locals began to talk about strange figures seen near the Jamesons' home, headlights in the woods at night, and rumors of a religious cult operating just miles away. Some believed Bobby and Sherilyn had gotten involved in something spiritual and dangerous. Others swore they'd seen Sherilyn alive months later, walking along a road, barefoot, eyes vacant. No one could prove anything. But the Jamesons' presence seemed to echo long after they were gone. Weeks turned into months, and the trail went cold. The truck was impounded. The woods were searched again and again, every inch mapped, every lead followed. But the Jamesons had evaporated. Theories kept spreading like wildfire. A psychic claimed the family had been murdered and buried under leaves. Another said they'd been taken underground, into the earth. Law enforcement didn't dismiss the tips, but none led anywhere. One hunter reported seeing 3 figures in white clothing moving silently through the trees near Red Oak. Another swore he saw a little girl crouched behind a tree stump, staring, unmoving, before vanishing into the fog. Were these real sightings, misremembered moments, or echoes of a community desperate for answers? It wasn't just the sightings that stirred unease. It was the silence. The eerie, stretching quiet of a case with no suspects, no motive, and no remains. Even the FBI, brought in months later, admitted they were baffled. No ransom note, no signs of abduction, no foul play confirmed, just questions. And then, almost a year later, a break, of sorts. A set of bones was found deep in the forest near where the Jamesons' truck had been left. Investigators moved fast, sealing the area, cordoning off the site. Forensic teams arrived, but identification would take time. In the meantime, theories hardened. Some believed it proved murder. Others were sure it was planted. And a few believed the truth had been lost long before the bones ever turned up. The bones were eventually confirmed. Bobby, Sherilyn, and little Madison, found lying side by side in shallow ground, partially covered by brush and rock. But there was a problem. No trauma, no bullet holes, no broken bones, no clear cause of death. The bodies were skeletal, weathered by time and nature, but arranged too neatly, too deliberately, as if someone had wanted them found, or preserved them for a while before burial. Madison's skull was found a few feet away from the others. Her pink shoes still had traces of mud that didn't match the soil where the remains lay. Theories exploded again. Cult sacrifice, poisoning, hypothermia. But none explained the money. None explained the footage. and none explained why everything just stopped. Some began to look beyond the physical. Local folklore resurfaced. Old Choctaw legends about the woods being alive, cursed, a place where spirits whispered and souls lost their way. Others tied the disappearance to an old, now defunct cult that once operated in the Ouachita Mountains nearby. The cult, known for its obsession with purity, silence, and isolation, had reportedly disbanded in the 90s. But some said it never really ended. Strange gatherings had been spotted years earlier, robed figures chanting by firelight. And then there were the writings inside the Jameson home, phrases scratched into walls, backwards text, mirrors covered with cloth. Some investigators dismissed it as mental illness, others saw signs of ritual, but no one could explain why the entire family would vanish, willingly or not. When the medical examiner released the final report, the results only deepened the fog. No conclusive cause of death, no evidence of foul play. Time of death, unknown. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole, softened their story, and handed back only bones. But even bones tell stories. The way they were arranged, facing east, in a line. The fact that Madison's favorite toy, a stuffed cat, was missing, though she'd carried it everywhere. Her clothes, still intact, bore no tears, no signs of panic. What kind of death leaves no marks? Some locals whispered of old forest spirits, of people being taken, not murdered. Sherilyn had once told a friend, half-jokingly, that the land had eyes. After that, even the most skeptical paused a little longer in the woods. The Jameson case eventually left the headlines. Reporters moved on. Law enforcement closed the file. Theories turned into blog posts, podcasts, comment threads. Yet something about the story refused to die. Every few years, someone claimed to have seen Sherilyn's eyes in a crowd, or heard a little girl's voice whispering their name in the woods. Paranormal investigators descended on the site, setting up equipment and leaving with static. A YouTube channel claimed to capture Madison's giggle in the night air, unverifiable, eerie, and strangely specific. But the biggest question still lingered. Why? Why would a family drive deep into the woods, walk a short distance from their truck, and lie down to die? Unless they didn't lie down, unless they met something there, something that never left. Years later, the Jameson case became something else entirely. Not just a missing persons file, not even a tragedy, but a kind of urban legend. Children dared each other to visit the spot where the truck was found. Locals began calling that stretch of forest the silent line, saying phones always lost signal there. Some hikers even reported seeing 3 figures standing motionless in the tree line, 2 adults and a small child, only to vanish when approached. One investigator, long retired, quietly admitted, "I don't think they were alone out there." He never elaborated. Didn't need to. There was something in his voice, fatigue, fear, and a quiet sense of failure. Because despite all the evidence, all the man-hours, all the facts, the Jamesons remained an unsolved whisper in the woods. In the end, the story is not just about what happened, but how it haunts. A family vanished in daylight, left behind a truck, a pile of cash, a daughter's smile frozen in time. And still, we're left with nothing solid, no motive, no culprit, just questions buried like the bones they found. And maybe that's the point. Some stories aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to echo, through towns, through forests, through generations. They ask us to look closer, to listen, to wonder, and to remember that sometimes what's missing isn't just the people. It's the part of the truth we're not ready to see. One theory that quietly circulated within law enforcement, but was never made public, suggested the Jamesons had been lured. Not forced, not chased, but invited. A retired profiler who briefly reviewed the case noted how calmly they left their vehicle, how little struggle was evident. He speculated they may have met someone they trusted, or were manipulated by someone claiming to offer help or spiritual guidance. Bobby's writings hinted at a coming transition, Sherilyn had drawn symbols linked to both Christian mysticism and pagan rites. And their sudden interest in isolated land? It sounded less like escape and more like preparation, as if they weren't running from something, but running to it, someplace or presence they believed held the answers. The truck's location became its own symbol. Parked on a flat patch, halfway up the mountain trail, the vehicle felt staged. Not abandoned in panic, not hidden, but displayed. Inside, investigators found Sherilyn's handgun tucked beneath a seat, loaded but untouched. A local tracker said the terrain nearby was treacherous, yet the family's presumed path led deeper into it, like they were drawn by instinct. And then there was the final timestamp on Bobby's phone. A blurry photo taken of Madison, standing in a clearing, arms at her sides, eyes downcast. No one could explain it. No coordinates, no metadata, just one last image. The forest behind her, gray and dense. The light falling wrong. It felt off, like a moment captured in a place the world wasn't meant to see. Long before the Jamesons ever stepped foot on that mountain trail, the region carried its own legacy of disappearances. In the 1970s, a pair of hikers vanished under similar circumstances, not far from where the Jamesons were found. Their campsite was left untouched, firewood stacked, food unopened. In the 1990s, a surveyor claimed he heard voices speaking backward dialects, echoing from between trees that shouldn't have carried sound. Locals whispered about the veil in those hills, a thin space where reality folds. It wasn't just ghost stories. Native tribes had avoided the area for centuries, calling it a silent zone. The Jamesons didn't just go missing in the woods. They vanished in a place long known for swallowing those who linger too long. Yet despite the lore, the land remains untouched. The Jamesons' truck was never towed. It rests there to this day, rusted, sun-bleached, overtaken by weeds, like a marker, or a memorial, or both. Occasionally, someone leaves flowers near it. No one admits who. Hikers sometimes report dreams after visiting the site. Vivid, unsettling dreams of being followed, of hearing a child call their name. Some dream of the same clearing from Madison's final photo, though they've never seen it. Paranormal investigators have recorded fluctuations in magnetic fields around the truck, but equipment fails deeper in the trail. Batteries die. Signals cut out. The forest does not welcome observation. It absorbs it. And still, people keep coming, not looking for answers, but to feel something that logic won't touch. Years after the Jamesons' disappearance, a private researcher claimed to have found a journal buried in a tin box not far from the site. It was water-damaged, its pages warped, but a few entries remained legible. One read, "They called to us in sleep. We followed without fear." Another, "We shed the skin of this world for something older." Investigators dismissed it as a hoax, planted by thrill-seekers, but the handwriting bore eerie similarities to Sherilyn's. No fingerprints were recovered, and strangely, the tin box was lined with lead, something used in occult traditions to block energy leakage. Whether authentic or not, the journal reignited public obsession, not with finding out what happened, but with wondering whether it was ever meant to be understood. The Jamesons weren't just a family. They were three people slowly unraveling, together. Friends described Bobby as increasingly withdrawn, haunted by something he couldn't name. Sherilyn's relatives said she'd taken to long walks at night, barefoot, whispering things no one could hear. And Madison, she started drawing things. Circles within circles. A forest with no sky. A figure standing alone, arms too long, face too smooth. When asked, she'd say, "He waits there." The family's pastor, once close to them, admitted he'd been asked to perform a blessing over their house. He declined, said he didn't feel safe. Something was already in, he later said. They didn't need a house blessing. They needed to leave. But maybe they didn't leave in fear. Maybe they left because they were invited. In the years that followed, the Jameson story became a magnet for the strange. Psychics claimed they could still hear Madison's laughter on the wind. A well-known medium visited the site and collapsed within minutes, mumbling something about fractured timelines. Even skeptics couldn't ignore the patterns. Equipment failed. Shadows moved the wrong way. The woods seemed to reject inquiry but reward surrender. Some said the family had stepped through, into a place not measurable by maps or ruled by time. A few fringe theorists argued they'd entered a thin place where the boundary between worlds wears down. What if the Jamesons hadn't disappeared, but crossed over? Not in death, but in purpose, in choice. Still, not everyone believes in alternate dimensions or supernatural forces. To some, the Jamesons were victims of poor mental health, isolation, and an unfortunate chain of events. The cash in the truck, paranoia, the strange writings, delusion, the woods, unforgiving. And yet, even those who hold to logic admit something doesn't fit. Too many coincidences, too much absence where there should be evidence. The scene was too silent, too neat. Most missing persons cases offer something, a struggle, a call, a lead. This one left only voids. Even their dog, found barely alive in the truck, couldn't offer clues. It simply stared ahead, unblinking, as if it had seen something no language could contain. Years passed, but the pain never dulled for the Sodder family. Jenny Sodder, the children's mother, became obsessed with the fire. She planted flowers in the ashes of the home, one for each missing child, and wore black in mourning for the rest of her life. Her grief turned into relentless pursuit. She read every newspaper, questioned every traveling salesman, and even taught herself basic Italian, just in case one of her children had been taken overseas. George, her husband, shared the obsession. He drove across the country chasing rumors and chasing hope. If there was even a whisper of a sighting, George would pack his bag and go. Most leads turned cold, but they never stopped trying. In 1952, 7 years after the fire, the Sodders erected a billboard along Route 16, the highway that ran past their property. It featured the faces of the missing children, the reward offer, and a burning question: what was their fate? That billboard remained for decades, a haunting landmark to every driver passing through Fayetteville. It became more than a plea. It became a symbol. Locals talked about it in hushed tones. Tourists took photos, and journalists revisited the story every few years. The image of those 5 innocent faces, frozen in time, stared down at the road like silent witnesses, but the silence never broke. Then, in 1968, over 2 decades after the fire, a letter arrived at the Sodder home. It was postmarked from Kentucky and addressed only to Jenny. Inside was a photo of a young man in his 20s with dark hair and sharp features. On the back of the photo, scrawled in strange handwriting, were the words, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Lil boys, A901 32 or 35. The family was stunned. Louis was the second oldest of the missing children. He would have been around that age. The man in the photo bore a striking resemblance, but the message was cryptic. Who was Frankie? What did the code mean? And why now? Once again, the Sodders were left with more questions than answers. They hired a private investigator to trace the sender, but he vanished, literally disappeared. The photo was added to the billboard. Now, alongside the children's younger faces, was the image of the man they believed might be Louis as an adult. The mystery deepened. Some experts theorized that the children had been kidnapped by a human trafficking ring, possibly taken abroad. Others believed they had been raised in secrecy, their identities changed, but without any definitive proof, without remains, without DNA, without confession. The case remained officially closed. Still, the Sodders clung to hope. Jenny said she would know her children if she ever saw them again, and every time the phone rang, every time a stranger passed through town, she listened for voices she hadn't heard since Christmas Eve 1945. As the decades rolled on, the Sodder story began to blur between fact and folklore. Locals debated the truth in diners and barbershops. Some swore they saw the children in nearby states. Others whispered about organized crime and shady dealings the Sodders may have stumbled into. One theory suggested George's vocal criticism of Mussolini had made him enemies. perhaps even among Italian sympathizers in West Virginia. Another claimed the fire was staged to punish the family, and the children were abducted as leverage. But there was never solid evidence, just fragments. A ladder moved, a phone call, a stranger watching the house. In isolation, they meant little, but together, they painted a picture of something darker. In 1989, Jenny Sodder passed away, 44 years after the fire. She died never knowing what happened to her children. The house had long since been demolished, but her memory lived on in her surviving children and in the countless people who had heard the story. The billboard, worn and weathered, was finally taken down shortly after her death, yet the questions remained. What happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty that night? Why was there no trace? Why did no one speak? The case had become more than a family tragedy. It was a national mystery, woven into the strange fabric of 20th century American lore, a riddle without an answer. Today, the Sodder case continues to haunt internet forums, podcasts, and late-night conversations. Amateur sleuths pore over old records, analyze photographs, and try to crack the bizarre code on the back of that mysterious letter. Some have even attempted facial recognition comparisons between the Louis photo and aged-up projections of the missing boy. But even with modern technology, the trail remains cold. The absence of any remains or reliable witness has turned the case into a kind of myth, not because it's false, but because it resists resolution. In a world used to clear answers and quick conclusions, the Sodder mystery lingers because it offers neither. The surviving Sodder children eventually grew up and started families of their own, but they never stopped searching. Each one carried a version of the story with them, memories tinged with sorrow, fear, and a stubborn kind of hope. Some moved away from West Virginia, trying to leave the shadows behind. Others stayed close, as if proximity might bring peace, but none of them ever declared the case solved. To this day, descendants of the Sodder family still receive tips from strangers. They still field emails and phone calls from people claiming to know something. And while the likelihood of finding the truth grows slimmer each year, one thing hasn't changed. The silence still hurts more than the answer ever could. What makes the Sodder mystery so gripping isn't just the tragedy, it's the patterns. The tiny, unsettling details that don't add up. The cut phone line, the missing ladder, the strange man watching the children from the road, the fire that burned hot enough to destroy a home but supposedly left no trace of 5 young bodies. Each detail alone might be explainable, but together, they defy logic. It's a case that challenges our sense of closure. We want resolution. We crave explanation. But the Sodder case gives us none, just the slow ache of unknowing, and the fear that someone, somewhere, still knows the truth and chose silence. In a way, the story of the Sodder children isn't just about what happened that night. It's about how we cope with the unexplained, about how some families dig in, year after year, chasing every rumor, clinging to every thread. It's about the power of unanswered questions to shape lives, to fracture families, and to echo through generations. The Sodders were just an ordinary family on a snowy holiday evening, but in a single night, they were cast into one of the most chilling mysteries in American history. A fire stole more than a home. It stole certainty, comfort, and the kind of closure most of us take for granted. Even decades after the fire, the town of Fayetteville never truly let go of the Sodder mystery. Residents whispered theories in grocery store aisles and over diner coffee. Teachers passed the story on to students like a local legend. Half cautionary tale, half unresolved ghost story. For some, it was simply a tragic accident, best left in the past. For others, it became a symbol of something more sinister: corruption, conspiracy, or perhaps a warning of how easily truth can be buried under smoke and silence. What lingered wasn't just the fire's devastation, but the idea that the full story had never truly come out. Stranger still were the reports that continued to surface over the years. A woman in St. Louis claimed to have overheard a confession from a dying man who said he'd helped kidnap the Sodder children. In Florida, a man once walked into a police station saying he was Louis Sodder, before abruptly disappearing. Each time, the hope was reignited, and each time, the trail collapsed into dust. The emotional toll on the surviving family was immense. It was as if they were trapped in a purgatory of what-ifs. always one step behind the truth. The fire had ended one night, but the nightmare never did. Time passed, but the clues never fully dried up. In 1989, a letter arrived at a local television station. It claimed to be from someone who had known the Sodder children, and included names that matched none of the known suspects. The handwriting was erratic, the grammar broken, but the tone was confident. Investigators looked into it, but like so many leads before, it faded without resolution. Still, the family kept the letter, as they had every scrap, every tip, every shred of hope. The pile of evidence had grown unwieldy over the years, but it was all they had left to cling to. By the time the last of the Sodder parents had passed away, the case had become a family legacy. The surviving siblings took up the search, organizing files, rechecking witness statements, and even erecting a billboard near the site of the fire. It stood for decades, faded, weather-worn, yet unmissable. Tourists driving through the mountains would pull over just to read the words. What was their fate? The sign wasn't just for answers. It was a monument to endurance, a refusal to let the story be buried. The fire had burned their home, but the truth, that was still smoldering. Years turned to decades, but whispers still surfaced from time to time. A man at a bus terminal in Charleston swore he'd seen a young girl crying, whispering that her house had burned and she missed her brothers. In another town, a woman claimed to have treated a boy with burns matching the description of one of the missing Sodder children. None of it could be confirmed. No names, no photographs, just vague memories that surfaced in bars, bus stops, and old nursing homes. But for the Sodder family, even a rumor was enough to reawaken hope. In the quiet hills of Fayetteville, the empty spot where the Sodder house once stood remains undisturbed. No new homes were built there, no playgrounds or shops, just grass and memory. Locals say the land feels heavy, as if holding on to something. When the wind cuts through at night, it's said you can hear faint echoes, like the voices of children calling from the shadows. The fire may have ended that Christmas Eve, but the questions it ignited still flicker today. No one has truly forgotten, and maybe, just maybe, that's because the story isn't finished yet. Years passed, and the Sodder family's determination didn't fade. It hardened. George, once a fiery figure, now moved with the quiet intensity of a man who had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. Jenny, too, kept the children's memory alive, not just in photographs, but in rituals, setting places for them at dinner, praying for them every night, and keeping their room untouched. Rumors began circulating that one of the children had been spotted in New York. Another claimed a boy matching Maurice's description was seen in a monastery in Italy. The family chased each lead, no matter how outlandish, with the desperation of people who couldn't afford not to believe. Each time they returned empty-handed, but never defeated. In 1967, a new letter arrived, postmarked from Kentucky, unsigned. Inside was a photo of a young man in his 20s. On the back, scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting, were the words, "Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie, A90132 or 35. The resemblance was chilling. Jenny was certain it was him. The family hired a private investigator to trace the letter's origin. He accepted the job and was never heard from again. No police records, no sightings, nothing. Just like that, another thread unraveled. The photo became a fixture on the Sodder family's mantle, framed like a portrait of hope, but they couldn't shake the fear. Was this another cruel joke, or the closest they'd ever come to knowing the truth? The mystery had long since left the headlines, but for the Sodder family, it was still front-page news. Every single day. George died in 1969, never learning what truly happened to his children. His final years were consumed by this singular obsession. He kept a billboard along Route 16, pleading for answers, offering a reward, even as the paint began to peel and the world moved on. Jenny, now alone in the family home, wore black every day until her own death in 1989. Their surviving children, grown now, with families of their own, carried the torch. Some believed in the kidnapping theory. Others, after years of disappointment, quietly accepted the worst. But none could forget, Even today, the charred ruins of the Sodder home have long been replaced, the billboard gone, the road quieter. But the story persists, passed down in whispers, in forums, in documentaries. Each generation finds itself asking the same questions. If the fire consumed the children, where were the remains? If it didn't, where did they go? And who had the power and motive to make 5 children vanish without a trace? The case is more than a family tragedy. It's a haunting symbol of unresolved grief, of unanswered questions, and of the human need to find closure, even when the truth may no longer be within reach. In 2006, more than 60 years after the fire, a new wave of amateur investigators reignited interest in the Sodder case. True crime forums, internet sleuths, and curious readers dove headfirst into archived records, blurry photographs, and family interviews. Some claimed to have uncovered new inconsistencies, missing police reports, altered witness statements, time discrepancies that made no sense. Others mapped out timelines and conspiracy webs that stretched from local politics to organized crime. It wasn't just nostalgia or morbid curiosity. It was an attempt to finish the job George and Jenny had started, to find the truth buried beneath layers of silence and ash. Among the more chilling discoveries was a letter reportedly sent to one of the Sodder children in the 1980s. It included a blurry photo of a man who resembled what one of the missing sons might have looked like as an adult. The letter gave no return address, only cryptic phrases and a postmark from Kentucky. The family was both hopeful and haunted. They hired a private investigator to follow the trail, but he vanished, never contacting them again. Was it a hoax, a cruel joke, or one final clue in a puzzle too old and too tangled to ever fully solve? As the years turned into decades, the Sodder home was eventually torn down, but the billboard remained. Updated with newer photos and bold questions, it became a landmark, part protest, part memorial. Tourists passed it on Route 16, often pulling over to read its somber message. For the Sodder children who survived the fire, life moved forward, but never far from the shadow of that night. They grew up, had families, and lived their lives, but each holiday, each anniversary, was stained with the same unanswered question. What really happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty? Even now, the town of Fayetteville whispers when the Sodder name comes up. Theories persist like local legends. Kidnapped children raised under new identities, government conspiracies, mafia retribution, and inside jobs. The local fire department never offered a new explanation. No death certificates were ever issued for the missing 5. And in the minds of those who still care to ask, the absence of proof feels like its own kind of evidence. In the quiet hills of West Virginia, the truth may still lie buried, but the story remains very much alive. Years passed, but the Sodder family's determination never faded. Jenny Sodder continued to wear black every single day, a silent protest against the official version of events. George poured his remaining years into investigations, chasing rumors that stretched from Kentucky to Florida. Each lead turned cold, but never meaningless. Every unanswered question kept their hope alive. To the outside world, it looked like they were clinging to fantasy. But to them, this wasn't over. They weren't just grieving a loss. They were resisting a lie. And even as they aged, their mission became a legacy passed down to their surviving children. Today, the Sodder home is gone. The billboard has long since weathered away. But the story still lingers, in true crime circles, in whispered conversations, and on message boards full of amateur sleuths. No graves were ever found. No bodies. Just 5 names that never faded from memory. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. Their disappearance remains one of America's most haunting cold cases. Some call it a mystery. Others call it a conspiracy. But for those who remember that silent, smoldering Christmas Eve in 1945, it's something far more personal. A wound time refused to heal.